It was Easter Saturday in 1916. The Russians were about 200 yards from our lines, from the Austrian lines, and I remember it was a cold day, snow was lying on the ground, and suddenly two Russian soldiers got out of their trenches with a Red Cross flag to bury their dead. We used that opportunity and we sent out two of our soldiers. They went into no man's land and took the dead away. But there was one in the barbed wire, and we didn't know. He was lying face down, and we didn't know whether it was a Russian or an Austrian. And the Russians went there, turned him round and said, "It's an Austrian. Come nearer, don't be afraid, we are not going to do you any harm." So from that moment, not a shot was fired. It was as if we had arranged a kind of private armistice. On Easter Sunday morning, I was in charge of the company. I got a telephone call from one of our advanced posts. The people were quite excited and said, "The Russians have thrown something into our hole, and it's a kind of trench for those." And I said, "Well, what is it?" "We don't know. Shall we lift it?" Say, "Of course." "Well, it might be hand grenades." "Well, if it is, then throw them back. In any case, you'd have to lift it." And they said, all right, sir." And I said, "Let me know what it is." A minute later, the telephone rang again. It's 2 Easter eggs, real gaudily painted Easter eggs with an inscription, "Happy Easter."
Well, one evening, I was warned that I had to go on a firing party, 6 of us, to shoot 4 men of another battalion who had been accused of desertion. Well, I was very worried about it because I didn't think it was right in the first place that Englishmen should be shooting other Englishmen. I thought we were in France to fight the Germans. And another thing, I thought that I knew why these men had deserted, if they had deserted, because I understood their feelings, and what would make them desert. The fact that they'd probably been in trenches for 2 or 3 months without a break absolutely broke the nerve. And I thought that was the reason why I didn't feel like shooting them. So later in the evening, an old soldier in our battalion told me that it was one thing in the army which you could refuse. So I straightway went back to the sergeant and said, "I'm sorry, I'm not doing this." And I heard no more about it. I think one reason why I felt so strong about it was the fact that a week before, a boy in our own battalion had been shot for desertion. Well, I knew that boy, and I knew that he'd absolutely lost his nerve. He couldn't have gone back into the line. And he was shot, and I know the exact place where he was shot. And the tragedy of that was that a few weeks later in our local paper, I saw that his father had joined up to avenge his son's death on the Germans.
One day we got orders to storm a French position. We got in, and my comrades fell right and left of me. But then I was confronted by a French corporal, he with his bayonet at the ready, and I with my bayonet at the ready. For a moment, I felt the fear of death. And in a fraction of a second, I realized that he was after my life exactly as I was after his. I was quicker than he was. I tossed his rifle away and I ran my bayonet through his chest. He fell, put his hand on the place where I had hit him, and then I thrust again. Blood came out of his mouth and he died. I felt physically ill. I nearly vomited. My knees were shaking and I was quite frankly ashamed of myself. My comrades, I was a corporal there then, were absolutely undisturbed by what had happened. One of them boasted that he had killed a Paulie with the butt of his rifle. Another one had strangled a captain, a French captain. A third one had hit somebody over the head with his spade. And they were ordinary men like me. One of them was a tram conductor, another one a commercial traveler. Two were students, the rest were farm workers, ordinary people who never would have thought to do any harm to anyone. How did it come about that they were so cruel? I remembered then that we were told that the good soldier kills without thinking of his adversary as a human being. The very moment he sees in him a fellow man, he is not a good soldier anymore. But I had in front of me the dead man, the dead French soldier, and how would I like him to have raised his hand? I would have shaken his hand and we would have been the best of friends, because he was nothing like me but a poor boy who had to fight, who had to go in with the most cruel weapons against a man who had nothing against him personally, who only wore the uniform of another nation, who spoke another language, but a man who had father and mother and a family perhaps. And so I felt. I woke up at night sometimes drenched in sweat because I saw the eyes of my fallen adversary, of the enemy, and I tried to convince myself what would have happened to me if I wouldn't have been quicker than he, what would have happened to me if I wouldn't have thrust my bayonet first into his belly. What was it that we soldiers stabbed each other, strangled each other, went for each other like mad dogs? What was it that we, who had nothing against them personally, fought with them to the very end and death? We were civilized people after all. But I felt that the culture we boasted so much about is only a very thin lacquer which chips off the very moment we come in contact with cruel things like real war. To fire at each other from a distance, to drop bombs is something impersonal. But to see each other's white in the eyes and then to run with a bayonet against a man, that was against my conception and against my inner feeling.